Hello and welcome back to the Scenario 7 podcast. My name is Sam and today we're here for a review of the British Grand Prix. And of course, I couldn't do this alone. Today, I'm joined by the lovely Matt Collier. Matt, how are you doing, mate?
I'm doing good, thank you, Sam. Very much looking forward to digest this weekend because it was definitely a brilliant one. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. And as you said, what a weekend of action going through practice to Sunday. We had action throughout. We had so many heart-stopping, just incredible moments. But let's start on the Saturday with qualifying. And there were a few small moments that definitely stood out. But Matt, for you, what moments stood out for you?
There's quite a few, to be fair. I'll start off with both Hasses out in Q1. It was only just in Canada which we saw them qualify, I think P5 and P6, and to see them both out in Q1 in the wet conditions kind of just go to show how unpredictable Haas are, both in wet conditions and dry conditions. You had both Aston Martins out in Q1, you had the Latifi out qualify Alex Albon to get into Q2, then eventually into Q3. Ocon qualified P15, which was a bit of a surprise. Normally he's quite good in wet conditions. I think he qualified like P3 in the wet at Belgium before. So yeah, that was a bit of a surprise. Latifi just had a brilliant qualifying session. It was nice to see him up there for once, and yeah, he definitely had a lot of good pace. I think Crofty said that he qualified P10 in Belgium in the wet last year, so he's a bit of an underrated wet specialist. And then onto the big guns at the front, you had Verstappen and Leclerc both do like 360 spins, trying to push as hard as they could. And then the surprise of them all was to see Carlos Sainz qualified P1 on pole position.
Yeah, there were certainly some big moments, but I want to start with Aston Martin. As you mentioned, both out in Q1, and it's the second week in a row where they've just got it horrendously wrong in the wet qualifying, because we've seen in so many races that, well, especially from recently, that their car has good race pace. They do have pace in that car. And in qualifying before these two wet sessions that we had in Canada and Britain, they did all right. Well, they were starting to improve anyway, but they just can't work out how to set their car up in qualifying in the wet, which is slightly worrying. But of course, it's not exactly the biggest issue in the world because the majority of the races this season will be in the dry, but it is an issue and they need to sort it out. Nicholas Latifi, wow, top 10. I mean, I feel bad now because I was like, I don't know if you swapped him out in the end, but in our fancy show, I was like, why have you got Nicholas Latifi? And then as soon as I say that, he gets a top 10 in qualifying, but he did it in the most Nicholas Latifi way possible. So he scrapes through Q1, he scrapes through Q2, and it comes to Q3, and he's 22 seconds off pole position. He was 18 seconds off ninth. So it was the most Latifi thing I've ever seen, but I absolutely loved it. And hopefully we can start seeing him be a bit more competitive as he's really struggled this season. But as you said, potentially a bit of a wet weather specialist with a P10 in Belgium last year. And then, of course, Carlos Sainz pole position, first ever pole, and another first later in the weekend. What a fantastic Saturday lap. And he was so surprised, but it just shows in the wet, just keep it on the track. Don't try and overdo it. Don't try and push too hard because you saw Leclerc spin, you saw Verstappen spin. Sainz just kept it on the track and got a pole. And a lot of the time, the wet, that's all you've got to do. But yeah, a fantastic qualifying session. And to be honest, I thought it wasn't as good probably as Canada's, but it was a very good one, and it set up the race well. And then the race just took it to another level. Matt, what were your general thoughts on the race?
I'm not going to do my best Gary Neville impression, but the race was for sure unbelievable. That's probably the best way to describe it. You had red flags, you had safety car, you had different strategies, it had everything. Lap 45 was gold. It was like seeing those overtakes was breathtaking. I'm just happy that Wanyu Zhou and Albon are okay. First of all, it's not well in F2. The halo definitely helped out in that race, and so did F1 with Zhou being upside down. And yeah, it was good to see he was okay. We also had like the two Alpha Tauris, Tsunoda and Gasly colliding with each other. There's so much that happened. It was a crazy race. Leclerc on his hard tires, whilst I think everyone else was on softs. There's so much to talk about. I've probably forgotten loads of stuff, but I'll let you try and fill in.
Yeah, no, it certainly was a very action-packed race, so much so that you'd be watching the action and then sometimes on screen you'd say, the FIA are investigating this, something you just haven't seen. So when we come to the instant report, we're probably going to miss stuff out because I've noted down all I can, but there's definitely stuff I've forgotten. But it was just such a thrilling race with so much action. Best race of the season so far by a mile, potentially the best race at Silverstone ever. That's how good it was. But yeah, the main thing to come from it is that Zhou Guanyu is okay after that horrible incident. And I want to talk about that now because we're going to go into the incident report. And it all started on lap 1 when, I'm going to try and break this all down. You had Russell turning in slightly on Gasly after the race start, with him not really realising how close Gasly are. Then that contact puts Russell into Zhou, who in the process goes flying upside down along the gravel before flipping into a fence. And then that wasn't it, because this then caused a chain reaction with Vettel ploughing into the back of Albon, sending him into the pit wall before bouncing across the track into Ocon and Tsunoda. Of course, this causing a red flag. First things first, the FIA didn't think it was, but do you think this was anyone's fault? Was anyone to blame?
No, it wasn't. There was so much going on, so many drivers, as you would explained, involved in that one incident. Gasly basically tries to squeeze for a gap, but Russell, being the first lap and the adrenaline, came across to left and squeezed him, and then also hit Zhou. And yeah, it was just a complete mess, but nobody deserved to get a penalty. As you said, it was a racing incident, and yeah, I think the stewards got that one right.
Yeah, I agree with you. It definitely wasn't worth the penalty because, of course, on lap 1, there's a lot of leeway given to the drivers for incidents. If you were going to say it was anyone's fault, you could potentially say it was Russell's, because he should have potentially realised. He did look in his mirror at Gasly, so he did know he's there, but I don't think he realised how close he really was. So if you were going to attribute blame, maybe slightly Russell, but at the end of the day, no one deserved to be punished. And I thought it was amazing that Russell completely just for a moment forgot that he could keep going, forgot about the fact that he could just continue in this race, and instead topped out the car and went to try and help Zhou. I thought that was an amazing moment. And for some reason, he gets a lot of hate in the sport, and I don't really know why. He's definitely one of the good guys. And I thought that moment was really amazing, and fair play to him. But the Zhou incident, wow, that was so dramatic. Seeing the replays of that, is just another incredible reason that the halo has just been superb for the sport. I mean, it saved another driver's life. Do you think that this is one of the greatest innovations, in F1 history?
Yeah, definitely. But this has been implemented because at the end of the day of Jules Bianchi. I think it's important to remember that. And yeah, it's good to see this halo saving lives. There's been so many examples of this halo protecting the drivers, but yeah, unfortunately, it all comes down to what happened with Jules Bianchi. But yeah, very happy that Wanu, Joe, and Albon were okay.
Yeah, no, because it was such a big incident. I mean, the halo has just been incredible. As you said, it saved countless drivers' lives. I mean, just in F1, looking at Leclerc in Spa 2018, Grosjean in Bahrain 2020, Hamilton in Monza last season, and today Zhou at the British Grand Prix. I mean, that's just F1. And then you look at F2, and even the same day as the Zhou incident, you had Roy Nissany getting into a collision with I don't remember who the other driver was, but he got into a collision and it saved Roy Nissany's life, even though he was an absolute idiot and caused the collision. It was all his fault anyway, but it saved his life. So I think the halo, he got hate at the start, but wow, I think it is one of the greatest innovations in F1 history, and it's just saving lives every season, which is just amazing. Other incidents, because we've only just talked about lap 1 so far. We had Valtteri Bottas retiring on lap 21 with, I think, either mechanical or technical issue. It hasn't come out about that yet. Then somewhere in between that, again, don't know the lap, we had Tsunoda and Gasly do a synchronized spin, and Tsunoda received a 5-second penalty for this. Matt, do you agree with this decision? Because I'm not going to lie, I haven't seen an angle yet where it shows that they make definitive contact.
Yeah, watching Tsunoda's onboard, he kind of goes for a dive at turn 2 and then all of a sudden just completely loses rear and they both spin at the same time. The best camera angle probably is Tsunoda's rear, which I haven't seen. So I think the penalty is deserved if you kind of dig into it more, because Tsunoda went for a dive bomb with Gasly and they both spun. So I think it was a fair result in the end.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, if the FIA have seen the replays and think it's a 5-second penalty, it's probably right. I mean, we haven't seen very good angles of it. For me, I've seen 2, and both of them look like they make no contact. They just, for some reason, just spin at the same time, which is very unlikely, which indicates they probably did make contact. But yeah, I think the FIA probably made the right decision on that. But it was such a bizarre moment as they just did a little synchronized spin at the same time, which actually on lap 28 meant that Pierre Gasly had to retire with a damage. And then later on into the race, we had lap 38, Esteban Ocon retired with a fuel pump issue, which then caused a safety car, which really got the race up and running again with some fantastic battling after that, with lap 45 being the final incident we're going to talk about. And this is, of course, a bit of controversy with Perez going off the track, fighting Leclerc into the chicane towards the end of the lap, the Vale chicane. And you had Hamilton overtaking both with Perez in front of Leclerc. The FIA investigated, said no further action was needed. Do you think that that was the correct decision? Because I've seen a lot of people that are not very big Red Bull fans think that Perez should have been penalised for gaining a position off track.
I think something very similar happened either last year or the year before, where a driver was basically off the track at that corner. Yeah, I can understand why people wanted a penalty, but I can understand the other perspective. And yeah, to be honest, it was just great racing. I didn't really care if someone got a penalty for that. It would have been harsh as well because they're both trying to get ahead of each other. Onto another topic, Alonso wasn't very happy about. I think it was Leclerc's weaving and said that he should have got a penalty and been promoted. And Gunter Steiner also said that Verstappen was he said that the Verstappen Schumacher incident was under investigation. A very similar thing happened last year with, I think it was Sainz and Russell, where I think Russell got like a 5-second penalty for a very similar incident. And yeah, Alonso said that Leclerc ended up weaving like 3 or 4 times, and we all know Alonso got a penalty for Canada for weaving. So yeah, it's an interesting one. But back to your question, I think I don't think a penalty was deserved, really.
Yeah, I'm gutted because with this Perez incident, because we were watching with my uncle as it was like a birthday Sunday lunch. He was like, "Oh, I bet that's definitely a 5-second penalty," and I was like, "No, I don't think he should get penalised." And he was like, "Oh, I'll bet you £10 that," and I didn't take the bet because I was like, as much as I think that it's not a penalty, I feel like I don't want to risk it by putting money on it, and I was absolutely gutted because I'd have won a good £10 note there. But I'm not sure what I think of it. I think it was probably a racing incident, as you want to promote racing, and it's not as if it did anyone much harm. It's a tough one, but as you said, bring up the other 2 incidents, barely scratched the surface because you had the Verstappen and Schumacher incident, which again I don't think I've seen enough to really make a decision on. So I'm going to go with the FIA's decision of no further action. And then Alonso's press conference, which is very funny because he was like, "Oh, I'm waiting for Leclerc to get a penalty because he weaved 3 times on the straight, and I weaved once in Canada and I got a penalty." And let's be clear here. Alonso did not weave once in Canada. He weaved several times. That is a complete lie that he weaved once and then all of a sudden he probably weaved about 6 times. So that was a load of rubbish. But I mean, again, I don't think I've seen the footage. So again, I'm going to have to go off the FIA because I don't think the TV directions was amazing in Silverstone. It showed some great stuff, but at the same time, I don't think the TV direction's been incredible. But of course, at the end of the day, I don't envy the person who has 40 cameras and has to choose which camera to show at the same time. So at the end of the day, you've got to cut them a bit of slack, but I didn't see the incidents enough or replays of it to really make a definitive judgment. Now let's go to the team-by-team breakdown, starting with the team at the top of the constructors, and that is Red Bull, getting 24 points this weekend with Verstappen going from 2nd to 7th and Perez going from 4th to 2nd. Matt, what do you think of Red Bull's weekend? I mean, damage limitation?
Yeah, I think that's the best way to describe it. Obviously, going into the weekend, before the race, they kind of probably expected both Red Bulls on the podium, but the way the race folded out, really, Perez pitted with wing damage and literally fell to the back of the grid. And yeah, it was like I think some like 30 seconds off the guy in front, or he had to make a ridiculous comeback, and he had a brilliant race, to be fair. And yeah, Verstappen had a lot of issues with his car. He felt he had a puncture. It was just like loads of rear and like floor damage. I saw a funny post on Instagram of like a bit of Verstappen holding up some like Alpha Tauri, I don't know, carbon fiber or something that got stuck under his car. But yeah, I think they'll be pleased how they managed to recover their positions and points. Verstappen's car was clearly wounded and he still got 7th place. And Perez to go from looking like he's probably going to get like 10th around lap 10 to end up finishing second somehow. I think they'll be pleased.
Yeah, I agree with you that while they did look strong and were unlucky not to get Verstappen, unlucky not to get pole on the Saturday with him lifting off because he saw the Perez spinning in front, not Perez, Leclerc spinning in front of him in qualifying, that just incidents in the race meant that they couldn't really perform, because I've no doubt that Verstappen would have won if he'd got no damage, because even on the lap series in the race, he looked very in control. He got into first after a Sainz mistake and then got unlucky with debris. But at the end of the day, I mean, Perez, a fantastic comeback drive as well. I think we'll be most happy is that Ferrari haven't really pulled away with them. I mean, they've got more points, but they haven't pulled away. And Leclerc didn't get a top 3 or a win to really pull that much closer to Verstappen. And Perez, who's also in the fight, was finished above Leclerc. So I think Red Bull will be happy with the fact that they were still the second best team in terms of points, and that Ferrari didn't get the maximum out of it. And onto the Ferrari, they got 37 points this weekend, with Leclerc going from 3rd to 4th and Sainz going from 1st to 1st, winning his first ever race in Formula One on the same weekend that he got his first ever pole position, which was very cool. But Matt, there's a few question marks over Ferrari this weekend. First of all, how do you think they did? And secondly, from a strategy point, they are very lucky to get 37 points this weekend.
Yeah, there's so much to talk about. I'll talk about Carlos Sainz first, getting his first career pole position and then converting it into his first career win. Last time someone did that was the GOAT, Pastor Maldonado, in the Williams. Yeah, they did very well in qualifying, especially Carlos Sainz. But yeah, onto the race. I mean, it was a brilliant battle. To be fair, there was brilliant battles around the whole field. But yeah, when I saw a safety car and Leclerc not pull into pits, I was like, "What are Ferrari doing? They pulled another strategy out, and it was, yeah, I just didn't understand what they were doing. The fact that it was hard compound tires as well, and it wasn't, for example, it wasn't even it was hards. It wasn't like mediums or something that was kind of comparable to softs. But yeah, Ferrari and their strategy, just they keep making mistakes. I can understand Leclerc's frustration, and to be honest, they bottled a 1-2. I think that's the best way to sum it up. But yeah, still a lot of points, as you said, and yeah, it just could have been so much more for Ferrari.
Yeah, I agree. Their strategy, I mean, let's be real here. I mean, we're 10 races into the season, but Ferrari are not going to win the constructors, and a Ferrari driver isn't going to win the drivers, because at the end of the day, every week we have examples of incompetence in terms of strategy, in terms of swapping their drivers around at some point, or them. It was just such a nightmare, because there were so many times where there should have been like, right, Leclerc, you should be the lead driver now. And they did it in the end, but they did it way too late. They're very lucky to get the points they did. I mean, their drivers Sainz and Leclerc as well this season have made mistakes. So they're relatively error prone, and Ferrari strategy wise are error prone. So they're not winning either of them unless they get themselves together, which they won't. But from a strategy point of view, shambles. Very lucky for Sainz to win. I mean, Sainz was benefited from the fact that Perez, Leclerc, and Hamilton had such a big fight, because if one of them had broken away, I think they'd have caught him. So we're very lucky from that point of view. It made sense for them to pit Leclerc because he was the one with damage. So he already was slower. So he needed the fastest compound. They left him out there on the hards, and he was a sitting duck. He was never finishing in the top 3 when they left him out. I mean, everyone could see that. So even they should have just tried a double stack, in my opinion. Or if you're going to leave someone out, I think you leave Sainz out, because at the end of the day, Leclerc's your lead driver. He gets the preferred strategy. So I think from that point of view, and then you saw Binotto after the race pointed the finger, clearly telling Leclerc, don't criticise the team. But yeah, nightmare from Ferrari. Very lucky to get 37 points. Yeah, they're so frustrating because they're very incompetent. But at the end of the day, fair play to Carlos Sainz, a race winner, a first pole position. He couldn't wish for much more, even though he got a bit lucky when he made a massive mistake when he was in first, which let Verstappen through, that then Verstappen was going to get damaged. But hey, he's got a race where no one can take that away from him. And he's got a first pole. No one can take that away from him either. Moving on to Mercedes, and after some negativity about Ferrari, Mercedes, I think we could be quite positive about, because despite only having one driver finish, with, of course, George Russell going from 8th to then DNFing on the first lap, they had Lewis Hamilton, who, starting 5th, finished 3rd with the fastest lap. And it could have potentially been more for him, as they showed very good race pace. So they got a collective 16 points. How do you think Mercedes did this weekend? And then we have another talking point as well. Russell not being allowed to continue after he showed fantastic sportsmanship. Do you think that's right?
Of course, a lot of questions there. I'll start with Russell first. His top 5 streak has finally come to an end, and it's a bit sad that it was his home Grand Prix. Watching him go to one new Joe, obviously it's a very gentleman thing to do. But I felt like he could have. I think he tried to restart his car, to be fair, and it couldn't restart. But then I remember Belgium last year. I think Perez crashed on the formation lap, and then he somehow managed to start the race. So yeah, it's a bit of an unclear rule, to be fair. But onto Hamilton, superb race. He was pumping in fastest lap after fastest lap, trying to catch the 2 Ferraris. It's a shame that when he pitted for the sauce, he just couldn't get them up to their full potential, because on the hards, he was doing brilliantly. I felt like he probably could have won that race if he managed to get the best out of his soft tyres. And yeah, that move he did on lap 45 was just goals. It was so cool to watch. But yeah, I think Mercedes will be pleased that they've finally got some very good race pace. As I said, Hamilton getting those fastest laps after fastest laps. And yeah, I think they'll be pleased with how they've done.
Yeah, I agree. I think they will be pleased. I mean, at the end of the day, the thing with Russell is that he went back to the pit, or he went to help Zhou, and then he told the stewards, "Don't touch my car. I'm going back to R something." And then he's back to the pits. Then he turns around, and all of a sudden, his car's flying in the air on a crane. So, unfortunately, the rule is that if the marshals touch his car or something, then can't continue. And it's just really unfortunate, to be honest, for him, because he showed some fantastic sportsmanship. So very unfortunate for him, but rules are rules, I guess. With Mercedes, I mean, I saw a graphic which shows that Mercedes were actually the quickest team on Sunday. They had the best race pace. But the problem with that is you have to add context to that, where both Red Bulls had damage at some point, and Leclerc had damage for Ferrari. So, of course, on an average, with Red Bull lacking pace until Perez got his wing changed, Verstappen couldn't repair his car at all, and then Leclerc had damage as well. So you've got to remember that context has to be added in. Hamilton was clean throughout, and just that's why he had the quickest race pace, because of the fact that the average, just you have to take into consideration that Hamilton didn't get damage. And of course that could have been brought down if Russell was in as well, but as they only had one driver, then that really helps them if they're doing well. But a fantastic race for Hamilton. It was a shame that he couldn't get his soft tyres firing, and I don't really know why that was, because I thought that a race win was on for him there. But fastest lap on the final lap, I think he did. So he clearly found some pace in the end, just a little too late. I honestly believe that without the safety car that Hamilton would have won. I think that while he did have a gap to Leclerc and Sainz, I just think that the laps he was putting in, I think he'd have caught him for the end of the race. So potentially unlucky there. But the safety car gave him an opportunity. So I think it's a positive weekend for Mercedes. They're clearly getting faster. And from now on, they have more wind tunnel time than Ferrari and Red Bull, because at the start of the season, it was Red Bull get 5% more than Mercedes, and then Ferrari get 10% more than Mercedes. But now it's Mercedes get 10% more than Red Bull and 5% more than Ferrari. So that could potentially swing in their favour, and their upgrade seems to have worked. So, three-way title fight, anyone? I'm saying this now so that I can potentially come back and clip it later. I have a feeling Mercedes will finish second in the constructors, because I think Ferrari are kind of bottle jobs a bit, and their strategy isn't good enough. But we'll have to wait and see. But yeah, good weekend for Mercedes on one side of the garage anyway, and on a sportsmanship side on the other. So yeah, let's move on from Mercedes and go to McLaren. They got 8 points this weekend. They had Lando Norris, who went from 6th to 6th, and Daniel Ricciardo, who went from 14th to 13th. How do you look at McLaren this weekend? I mean, it's pretty much the same every weekend, isn't it, with how each side of the garage is performing?
Yeah. Once again, Ricciardo just has no race pace. Qualified P14, finished 13th. I don't think I even saw him the whole race. I just didn't know what he was doing. I don't think he got any coverage. But yeah, Norris had a very good weekend. But as we explained earlier, Alpine are slowly catching McLaren, and this weekend Alpine outscored McLaren, so it's definitely a concern for the long run. McLaren are a shocker in Canada, so yeah, there's a lot of teams, to be fair. You just don't know what you're going to get with them on the weekend, and yeah, I feel like sometimes McLaren's one of them. But yeah, Norris getting 8 points. He just had a flawless race, really. No one was really battling him. And yeah, 8 points. I think the team will be pleased, but then a bit concerned about Alpine.
Yeah, it is effectively McLaren having Norris and then a DNF in the other garage, because at this point, Ricciardo's picking up no points every race. And if he does pick up points, they're very minor points. I don't really know what to say. I feel like a stuck record of just saying maybe he'll find his form. I'm sure Ricciardo will come good, because we all know how great a driver he is. But the more I say this, the longer I have to try and defend him, the harder it becomes, because he doesn't really, on the form this season, deserve to stay in that seat. And that's hard to say, because I do really like Ricciardo, but he's more, this is harsh, he's more of a personality than a driver now. He's more of you'll look at the best clips from the weekend, and it will be some race footage intertwined with Ricciardo off the track, like saying something funny. and that's all he is now. He's just kind of a joker without putting in serious race performances. So very frustrating with Ricciardo, and it's such a shame, really. But yeah, with Norris just doing what he does, 6th to 6th, very solid. Car looked all right on Norris's side. I mean, don't know what happened on Ricciardo's, but 8 points is all right considering they had one driver who just basically doesn't do anything. But then Alpine have caught them, of course, or are 2 points closer because they got 10 points this weekend, with Fernando Alonso going from 7th to 5th and Esteban Ocon going from 15th to DNF. So Alpine had one car that didn't finish and have still got more points than McLaren, with the driver who you'd have thought hasn't finished, but is just finished as a driver. There you go. That's a good link. Fernando Alonso, well, I've literally gone through what they did. Alpine, what do you think of them this weekend? Because Ricciardo's completely rattled me.
That's fair enough. I think Alpine will be pleased that they're gaining on McLaren. I definitely felt like Ocon would have scored points this weekend if it wasn't for his reliability issue. It was a bit of a surprise to see Ocon, as I've already explained, qualify P15, but there's definitely a lot of pace in that Alpine, and yeah, they definitely look like they've got the momentum to catch McLaren, and yeah, for Alonso to get 10 points, I think I'll be very happy.
Yeah, it was very solid for Alpine. I feel like they could catch McLaren. They're getting closer every race, and they've just got such a great drive lineup, because Fernando Alonso, for every race that goes past, more questions in my head are going, oh, could he get a world title if you put him in a Red Bull? And could he beat Max? Could he, if you put him in the right car, could he win another title? And his performances are superb every week. I mean, of course, last week in the race, he had an issue and then he did some weaving and got penalised. But the qualifying in Canada, 2nd place in the wet, showed how fantastic he was. And then 5th place in the Alpine, beating the McLaren of Norris. Fantastic. And then on the other side of the garage of Esteban Ocon, who from 15th just was doing really well and then just kind of got unlucky with a fuel pump issue. But another really good driver, and a driver that gets way too overlooked, in my opinion. But let's look at Alfa Romeo, the first of the teams to get a nil points. And you had Valtteri Bottas going from 12th to DNF. And there's Zhou Guanyu going from 9th to DNF. I mean, what more can you say about Alfa Romeo other than thank goodness that Zhou is okay?
Yeah, exactly. Thank goodness Guanyu Zhou is okay. He had a really good qualifying once again, out qualifying Valtteri Bottas. He's definitely looking a lot more comfortable in the car. But yeah, I saw an article basically saying that Bottas believes Alfa Romeo just going to have to prioritise reliability for the next few races, which kind of shows all the issues they've had throughout the season. As we talked about previously, Guanyu Zhou, there's been so many examples of him just not being able to finish a race, and it was very good to see him finish a race and score points out in Canada. But yeah, the pace is slowly dropping from Bottas's side. I don't know if it's just a confidence issue or whether other teams are just out developing them. But yeah, a double DNF. The only positive that they can take is that Guanyu Zhou is okay.
Yeah, no, completely. Reliability has been a massive issue for Alfa Romeo all season, and a double DNF with Zhou's incident completely destroying their car. I mean, they're gonna have to see if anything's usable from it, but it looks unlikely because the sheer amount of damage. This year, with there being a budget cap, they could be in trouble here, because the amount of money that they're going to spend just after Britain, fixing what happened with Bottas, and then going to Zhou and having to build a completely new car pretty much. If this reliability issues continue, then I genuinely see Alfa Romeo maybe not even being able to field a car for the last few races of the season, because their reliability is just awful, and they're spending all the money that they could be developing the car on fixing it. So it's worrying for Alfa, as they could, as much as if they finish now, they could get some good points because the car has decent race pace. But as the season goes on, and as they're spending all their money fixing the car while the teams around them are developing it, I could see them dropping down the order. But another team that got no points is AlphaTauri. So both Alphas getting 0 points. And it wasn't a DNF for AlphaTauri, but it was a very frustrating weekend as Yuki Tsunoda went from 13th to 14th, and Pierre Gasly going from 11th to DNF, which I should note that Tsunoda 14th was actually lost because we had 6 DNFs, which was pretty crazy. And AlphaTauri are not happy, Matt. They are not happy with Tsunoda, as not only has Tsunoda and Gasly made contact, but it meant that Gasly DNF'd and Tsunoda came last. So sure, this is a shocking Sunday from an AlphaTauri point of view.
Well, I can understand why Tsunoda's getting criticism, but at the end of the day, Tsunoda's in a terrible car that just didn't have any pace this weekend. That's basically explaining it very clearly. They just didn't have any pace. Gasly qualified P11, Tsunoda P13, and you just don't know what you're going to get with this AlphaTauri car. It's very unpredictable. Gasly had a brilliant race in Azerbaijan, but this weekend they just were so off it. Considering how many DNFs there were, and Latifi 12th in a Williams. I mean, none of them could beat Latifi in the Williams. Kind of just explains how terrible their weekend was. And yeah, there's not really much else to say. The incident, I mean, they're not even battling for points, I don't think, at that stage. So yeah, it's just an awful weekend really for them.
Yeah, it wasn't a good weekend. And there was another incident they had, which the FIA investigated. I remember it popping up saying they're investigating it. So it was Tsunoda and Gasly, with Tsunoda supposedly forcing Gasly off track, but then it was no further investigation needed. So it's clear that they were battling, and it could have been even worse. But yeah, not a good weekend for AlphaTauri, and Tsunoda and their team boss caught a flight home together. So I wish I was a fly on the wall watching that conversation and watching the just awkward silence on the plane home. But yeah, not very good weekend for AlphaTauri. But Haas, are they on the rise? They've finally got some good points. 5 points, which outscored 4 of the teams this weekend. So you had Kevin Magnussen, who went from 17th to 10th, and Mick Schumacher going from 19th to 8th. Mick Schumacher has got points, ladies and gentlemen, after me criticising him, a lot of people criticising, a lot of people calling him a fraud. He's finally got points, and let's hope he can finally push on and prove people wrong. But from a Haas point of view, to outscore all of their rivals, very positive weekend for Haas in a car that you never know what you're going to get.
Yeah, you don't know what you're going to get with this Haas. As I explained earlier, they qualified P6 and P5 in Canada in the wet. And then you come to Silverstone, it's wet, and they're both out in Q1. It's just so difficult to explain. Canada, they dropped from their high qualifying positions to Magnussen, I think it was like P15, P16, and then obviously Schumacher DNF'd in Canada, and it's almost like I've just got an Uno reverse card and they just keep playing it every race weekend because, yeah, they're poor qualifying position and they just jumped up the field. So it's literally the complete opposite of what happened in Canada. I think they'll be very pleased, more outscored Aston Martin, and yeah, Schumacher, well done, to be fair. Both the Hasses avoided the melee on lap one. So, yeah, that's probably why they got some good points, but they both had very good race pace. 5 points. They'll be pleased, especially Schumacher, to finally get his first points in F1.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the few occasions that start at the back is pretty ideal because you just avoid all the carnage in front of you and then you just swoop through, just gaining loads of positions. But it is so strange because, I mean, trying to decide what this car is. I mean, a few weeks ago, Matt, you said this car had great quali pace and rubbish race pace. And then this week, it's the complete opposite, where the qualifying pace was rubbish and the race pace was fantastic. So who knows? But yeah, fantastic result with both cars gaining a lot of places, especially Schumacher. Schumacher finishing 11 places higher than where he qualified. I mean, 6 DNFs helped, but it's still a very impressive result. And then a battle with Verstappen on the final lap. So, yeah, fair play to Haas. I really hope Schumacher pushes on and can start being a bit more competitive. But, yeah, Günther Steiner and the Haas team will be very pleased as they gain points on the next team. We're talking about Aston Martin, who, to be fair, did still get points, getting a total of 2, all from the same driver, with that driver being Sebastian Vettel, going from 18th to 9th. Another driver started at the back and then making his way forward, though he did get involved in the melee with him ploughing into the back of Albon. And then you had Lance Stroll going from 20th to 11th, another rising up the field. It was so bizarre, this race. But how do you look at Aston Martin? I mean, going back to the Vettel and Schumacher, what a lovely moment at the end, like them embracing, hugging, and apparently Vettel, when driving behind Schumacher, was just concentrating on Mick and shouting, go Mick in the car, which I just thought was so lovely. But Aston Martin, 2 points. What did you think of their weekend?
Yeah, it was so wholesome to see Vettel and Schumacher do an interview together. Schumacher's mum was like hugging all the mechanics, and yeah, it was really good to see Schumacher getting the points. But yeah, Aston Martin once again qualifying in the wet. They're just nowhere. It's just really strange. Stroll 20th in qualifying. I mean, that kind of just explains how slow they are in the qualifying in the wet, and then also Vettel qualified P18. Haas outscored them, which are their main rivals. But at least Vettel got 2 points. But yeah, they'll be disappointed that Haas have gained ground on them in the constructors.
Yeah, they'll definitely be disappointed at that, but they have potential in their car. When they work out how to set it up in the wet, they'll be fine. With just Vettel's a great driver, he'll get points. And Stroll, I mean, he didn't get points, but 20th to 11th, even with all the DNFs, is still a good climb and just outside the points in the end. So, yeah, I don't know. It's hard to call for Aston Martin because a lot of weeks, 2 points is a decent result for them, but it just turns out that Haas did better and they didn't take advantage when 6 cars DNF'd. I mean, Vettel was, P7 at one point, so could have been potentially been more, but yeah, it was a bizarre race, but 2 points isn't bad, even if it does mean they lose ground to Haas. They just need to work out in the wet what to do with their car. Now to the final team, that being Williams, and they got 0 points as well, as they make no ground again on anyone in the standings. With Alex Albon going from 16th to the medical room with a very I mean, I don't think it was disclosed why, but he did end up going to hospital after a really bad collision with the pit wall and then with Ocon and Sonoda with a lap one melee. So good to see he's all right. And then Nicholas Latifi with amazing qualifying, go from 10th to 12th. And the dream of points this season goes away. I mean, especially this weekend anyway. How do you look at Williams? I mean, teams are pulling away from them. Not much that Albon could do, but it is very much a case of if Albon can't get them the points, then no one will, which is very much like Haas, but Haas turned it around. So maybe there's hope for Latifi, but yeah, how do you look at Williams this weekend?
Even when Williams develop the car and improve it, they still can't score any points. That's probably the best way to describe it. Yeah, the Latifi qualifying P10 was definitely a surprise. It came to the race. Obviously, Albon couldn't really do much about the first lap crash. Yeah, it's just not looking really good, is it, for Williams? I can't see them catching any of the teams above them, to be quite honest. Yeah, it's not really much else to say.
Yeah, it is looking a bit bleak for Williams, but maybe they'd have got points if Albon wasn't involved in this crash. I mean, it's all hypothetical, but if Latifi could achieve P12, maybe Albon could have done more. But at the end of the day, Albon also started 6 places below Latifi, so it's probably unlikely, even with their upgraded car. Let's now move on to driver of the day. Now, what I've written down, I think I'm going to change my answer. But Matt, you go first. Who have you gone for?
I decided to go with Sir Lewis Hamilton. I felt like he had a superb weekend, and yeah, was very unlucky not to win the race. He went from P5 to P3. He was pumping in fastest lap after fastest lap, catching both the Ferraris. It was at one stage where he had like a 18.9 seconds gap, and I was just hoping that he'd pit, and then it slowly dropped off, and then he pitted and he went on hards. In my head, I was like, Hamilton's normally really good on his tyres. Is he going to put softs on and just completely surprise the 2 Ferraris? That's what I was hoping for. But yeah, to see one of the hards, I was like, felt like he definitely could have won that race. Yeah, but he still had a brilliant race, especially lap 45, that superb switchback. It was so cool seeing it live, and the commentary from Brundle and Crofty was superb. And yeah, it was really enjoyable to see Hamilton have such a good weekend, a really good pace, and yeah, he ended up getting 16 points, on the podium at his home race. Wasn't quite a win, but yeah, still managed to get the fastest lap. So that's why he's my driver of the day.
Yeah, a very deserved driver of the day for Hamilton, who did have a fantastic race. Now, I have written down Sergio Perez for driver of the day. I mean, he was the people's driver of the day. I think it's completely fair enough to give him driver of the day. I mean, I'm biased, but I think he's definitely with a shout. However, I'm going to change it, because despite Perez having a fantastic race, despite getting damage on lap 3 after Leclerc's dive bomb, which I think potentially could have been investigated, that's an argument for another day. Dropping him to last, he fought back, achieved an impressive second. But Mick Schumacher, I have criticised him, and I have to be fair, and when they do bad, you criticise them, but when they achieve a fantastic result, you have to praise them. But it's got to be either way. And from 19th to 8th, I mean, I know there's 6 DNFs, which did help him, but it's still a fantastic result. It's his first ever points. In a Haas, he finished higher than Magnussen, who has definitely been the superior driver for Haas this season. And it was just an amazing moment to see him and his family's reaction to getting 8th place in a very good race for him. And I really hope he can kick on, because he is just one of the most likable drivers on the grid. So I'm going to change my answer from Perez. Mick Schumacher is my driver of the day, but shout out to Perez, and also to Carlos Sainz getting his first pole and first race win. Has to be in with a shout as well. But that wraps up our podcast reviewing the British Grand Prix, and what a race it was. Remember to like and subscribe. Comment down below who your driver of the day was. And on audio platforms, remember to download, interact with it, give us a rating, tell us what you think. Reminder that our links to our socials are down below if you want to stay up to date with everything going on at the Scenario 7 podcast. But thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.